Hello, my name is Layton. I'm an intuitive and a mystic. And today I wanted to talk about the lower self, which, in my opinion, is more accurately described as the forgotten self. If you have had a shadow analysis reading with me before, then you are very familiar with that term because that is a term that I use in the reading because I see the lower self as being kind of the abandonment or us neglecting aspects of ourselves that are highly important and that have these higher qualities that just have been neglected or haven't been nurtured. So, from my perspective, when I look at any quality within myself or another human being, I see those qualities as having a higher aspect and a lower aspect. A good example of this is in someone who is a leader and they are highly charismatic. They have great leadership qualities. They have a good influence over other people. So that would be the higher aspects of these qualities. However, when trauma or pain or shame or insecurity leak in, it can begin to impact us and drag us down into the lower centers of our field. And when we get into those lower centers, we express the lowest expression of that quality. So someone who has a lot of potential to be a very powerful leader and who has influence over other people and is very charismatic may in their lower quality express manipulation, express power struggles, be a person that becomes very controlling. Now, that doesn't mean that those are necessarily aspects of their personality in general. And that's an issue that I think comes up a lot is we tend to struggle with different things and think, oh, well, it's just my personality to be anxious. It's just my personality to be envious. It's just my personality. I have anger issues. But what we don't see is that those aspects, they're actually just forgotten higher qualities. And so when we are in childhood, often what happens is that we have these various experiences in our very formative years that cause us to feel like certain parts of us are unworthy or are unacceptable. Certain aspects of us just aren't good. I know I had this experience in my own life, and I learned early on in childhood. And when I say learned, I mean this is what I took on and how I programmed things. I learned that I was too much. I learned that the things that I had to say weren't valued, and so it caused me to take on this certain identity. And when we begin to formulate our identity from our trauma and from the programming of the lower nervous system, what happens is that all of these qualities that they begin in this neutral space. They aren't being nurtured. They don't have the space. They don't have the we don't have the capacity to nurture them and raise them into this higher quality. So, if we look at it as if we're all born with all of these little seeds planted inside of us, and we have the seed of being a very compassionate person, the seed of being a teacher, the seed of being a healer, all of these various things. Those seeds, they have to be watered, they have to be nurtured, they need sunlight, they need exposure. And then once all of those elements are there and the stars kind of align, that is when we can really bloom and express these things about ourselves that we really wouldn't be able to express properly otherwise. But what happens is when we are traumatized, when we are children and we express certain aspects of ourselves and we are told that that was a wrong expression, you should not have expressed anger even though you felt like there was this injustice. You are being defiant by sharing your opinion. You know, when we are misunderstood, and our healthy expression is shamed, that seed becomes suppressed and we tuck it away, we hide it away. We don't want to water it anymore. We don't want anyone to see it, because if they see it, then we're in that position to be shamed again. If they see it, then everyone is going to see this thing about us that is bad, this thing about us that is wrong. And shaming ourselves for having a shadow doesn't transmute it, it feeds it. Shame has been used, across centuries to kind of tell people, get in line, you need to change, you need to be different in some way. And that's not to say that we don't hold people accountable. Of course we do. It's not to say that we don't need truth in society to maintain order and to call people into the highest aspect of themselves. Of course we do. But when we're taking a child and they're having these normal emotional expressions and they're trying to figure out the world and what their place in it is and how they can express themselves and how they can share these deep parts of themselves, and we're taking that child and immediately meeting those things by telling them that they're wrong and saying that they're bad or punishing them for it, or snuffing it out. We're snuffing out their light. And what happens is that the nervous system begins to develop a program that is associated with those responses. So this child learns, I'm safe when I don't share my opinion. I'm safe when I don't cry. I'm safe when I don't set a boundary. I'm safe when I don't show that I'm afraid. I'm safe when I don't express anger. And all of those things, it turns into this habit of bypassing, and it doesn't actually create safety. It's a faux sense of safety. And in that faux sense of safety, an identity begins to become built over the true identity, over the true individuality. And this is an identity that exists from this place of defensiveness and self-preservation. It's an identity that stems from survival mode. And as long as we maintain that identity, we will be continuing to act out of survival mode, whether we realize it or not. And so when we are doing shadow work, when we are looking at these different aspects of ourselves, I prefer to reframe the lower self as the forgotten self, because I believe that everything in there is redeemable. I believe that everything in there is transmutable. And I think that in the society that we live in, there's so often this tendency to label things. We want to label it as a mental illness. We want to label it as narcissism. We want to label it as someone being a bad person. And we're just writing off people that have so much potential. We're writing off ourselves when we have so much potential. And that's very dangerous, because people are then kind of developing this understanding that this is just who I am. I can't change this thing. So why even bother? Why even try? And we forget that everything exists to be transmuted. Everything exists to be healed. That's not bypassing. I am not suggesting that we set this kind of destination of, this is what the most healed version of me looks like, and I need to do these specific things in order to get there, because as long as we do that, we will always be bypassing, because we will be holding ourselves to some idealized standard that really doesn't exist as long as we are human. It's okay to be human. It's good to be human. What I'm instead inviting you to do is to enter into a relationship with yourself that is one of compassion and one of higher sight, because there's nothing higher about shaming and judging ourselves into a place where we're basically in this black hole because we feel like, well, I'm never going to be good enough anyway. I'm never going to be able to heal. I'm never going to be able to grow through this thing. You can. You can. No matter how lost you feel like you are, that's a lie. That is a lie from the enemy. I will say that right now. I say that as someone who has been diagnosed with so many different mental health issues that stemmed from severe trauma and dysregulation. And if I had continued to go down a path where I believed that that's who I was, and I believed that my trauma responses were my personality or were my identity, I would not be where I am today, because we cannot make true progress in our lives so long as we are attached to an identity that has been formed from a place of pain. But when we have this attitude of compassion with ourselves, when we enter into this relationship with ourselves where we can be very loving and have this higher perspective, and we can still call ourselves out on things, that is normal and that is healthy. We should do that. We should have self-awareness. We should acknowledge when we didn't really do our best in some scenario or in some relationship or in some event, and self reflect on that to see how we can maybe be more authentic in the future. When we go into shadow work, the way that I like to approach it is not from a place of, that childhood game operation, and I'm just flayed out on this table and I'm picking all these things out of myself that don't live up to my expectations, and that's not good enough. That has to go. No, it's about bringing balance. It's about having balance of the mind, balance of the spirit, balance of the body, balance of the soul. How can we integrate things into our life that will be nourishing? How can we have more balance? So, if you have ever done a shadow analysis reading with me before, then you know all about the forgotten self, because we talk about that in that reading. We talk about how everything, when we're moving through the shadow, it is not this element of what are these things in you that are bad, that we need to point this out and we need to fix it. No. Instead, we look at what are the energies that you're prone to? Where are you prone to imbalance? Where are you maybe prone to acting from a place of pain? Where are the triggers there? And now, how can we call back those abandoned aspects and say, you are worthy? I have a cat with me now. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of compassion. I am so sorry that I abandoned you. I'm sorry that I decided at some point in time that because so and so said this or because this happened, you were not good enough, because you are. And how can we then bring balance into all of it? The entire thing, it's all about balance. So if I notice that I have a trait within myself, let's say that I have been angrier lately, or I have been moodier lately, or something like that, that is a reflection not of a personality flaw, it's a reflection of an unmet need. There is something that maybe I'm not expressing. Maybe I am unwilling to look at a change that I need to make in my life. I'm not being nourished in certain areas. And so I look at those things and I make certain changes in order to bring more balance into my life, in order to be more balanced as an individual. So I have this thing that I wrote. It's just, I mean, it's one sentence. I don't know why I'm acting like it's a whole thing or something. That was my transition into reading this sentence that I wrote, but it says, the lower self is more accurately the forgotten self, a symptom of the abandonment of one's own angel. And the reason why I worded it that way is because every time we choose some trait or aspect about ourselves that isn't good enough, didn't make the cut, not worthy, we're throwing it, we're kind of tossing it to the side into some pile behind us, and we are not transmuting that thing. It's not going anywhere. We haven't rid ourselves of it the way that we think that we have. It's just kind of sitting there. And eventually, when it sits there long enough, something will come along to trigger us to jump right back into that expression because we haven't pulled it into its highest aspect. And, we don't want to be idealistic about this. I am not suggesting that we take a trait that we have and pull it into the higher aspect and it never drops into a lower expression again. That is just not really realistic. And a lot of things in both dogmatic Christianity and the New Age kind of suggest this. They kind of suggest, oh, well, if you really had the expression of Christ inside of you, then you would never be low vibrational again, and that is just not realistic. But it helps to reframe all of that stuff and instead kind of approach it from this place of, you know, I don't have to react to that anymore. This trigger happened, this expression came up. I'm acknowledging it, and it doesn't mean that I now have to go, it doesn't mean that I fell backwards and I now have to go and fix and change all of these things about myself. No. No. All we have to do, because that is going to create a whole shame spiral, and that is what creates those ideas around, I thought that I was past this, I thought that I had grown so far, and now here I am doing this thing, and now I feel bad about myself, and now I feel like there's something about me that isn't worthy, and we're going through the whole thing all over again. And so instead, the way that we approach it is kind of, oh, okay, I had this nervous system programming within me, and this event happened. It triggered this programming to come up. I can just feel my feelings in the moment. I'm safe to feel them because feeling them is not wrong. It doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't mean I need to change anything. I'm just going to feel it and acknowledge it so that my nervous system knows that it's safe to have emotions, so that my body knows that it's safe to express something. And then once I have let the sensations overwhelm my body and I have grounded into my body and showed my body, see, we had this very overwhelming emotional expression. These sensations came up and it was safe. It was okay. Once that happens, then I can say, okay, I felt that thing, and now I don't have to react. I can choose not to react. I can have the emotional response. I can have the sensations come up in my body, and I can say to my body, see, it's okay. You had this feeling, this trigger came up, it reminded you of this other thing, but that's not the life that we're in anymore. We don't have to keep repeating the program. It's okay that it came up, and now we can move on. Because it's when we linger, it's when we start overthinking or oversharing about it, that then that shame comes in. And then we start feeling ashamed of feeling shame, and it's this entire spiral. But we cannot transmute anything that we can't accept. We can't transmute anything that we're too afraid to accept. We can't transmute anything that we won't let ourselves feel. So we have to have that balance of, I let myself feel this. I acknowledge this. I also acknowledge that it's not inherently evil. It's not inherently evil that I had this envious thought. It's not inherently evil that I wasn't acting for my best self that day, and maybe maybe said something kind of petty. It's not inherently evil that I felt triggered by something that someone said. It's not inherently evil that I shared an opinion on something and someone disagreed with my opinion. We have to reframe our ideas around shame because they keep us locked in the lower self when we do not believe or understand that the lower self exists to be redeemed. Our pain exists to be redeemed, and Christ is the Redeemer. So the more that we pull all of that into the heart, and this is exactly what I talk about in my course, Overcoming the Lower Doppelganger. It's not about overcoming it in the sense of, oh, kicked it to the curb. We went at it and I won. So now I'm never going to have a shadow again. No, it's not about that at all. It's about overcoming that part of us that has made that our identity and that doesn't know how to separate from that because it's not our identity. Realistically, um, when we continue to perceive something as our identity, when we have consistent thoughts about something and we think my thoughts are who I am, and we don't realize that we actually have the power to change those thoughts and to redirect those thoughts, we come under the power of the identity of thought forms. We come under the power of the identity of the lower self. It's not who we are. It's not who we are. And so, what builds up our angel within us is our ability to take the pain and take the trauma and take all of these things that we decided were unworthy or we decided weren't they were bad, they didn't make the cut, and to love those things, to love those parts of ourselves, to love them into healing, to love them into that higher aspect. So, another example of this is I love teaching. Anyone who does this kind of thing loves teaching. And I can only speak for myself with this, but long before I ever started doing this kind of thing, I would have relationships with people where I was always giving unsolicited advice and I was definitely a fixer. I didn't realize that some people didn't necessarily like that. I had a part of me that was desperate to bloom. It was desperate to express itself. It was desperate to grow. It wanted to pop out of that earth and see the sun. And I was kind of unknowingly, and really it just wasn't time yet, I was stifling that part of myself. And so it continued to try to express itself, but because it had not been properly nurtured, it was expressing itself as me trying to fix things when someone was just opening up to me, or me giving unsolicited advice and kind of going into that fixer mode. And so if you notice that you're the kind of person that does that and that gets into that mode, you probably have an aspect of you that would make an incredible teacher. But we have to learn those boundaries, and we have to learn that it's not appropriate to do that, and we have to learn the way that it is appropriate to share our thoughts and ideas with other people in a way that they want to receive. They are putting themselves in the position to receive that. And so every single higher quality that we have, everything that we like about ourselves, it has the potential to fall into a lower aspect on a bad day, or when we aren't nurturing ourselves properly, or when we're very dysregulated in the nervous system, when we are, I don't know about you, but I was just sick for almost 2 weeks. And when I'm sick, oh man, I do not feel like my best self when I'm sick. I will at first, and then eventually when I'm at the point where I just feel sick to my stomach and I feel dizzy and nauseous and miserable. It's like I'm not having my highest thoughts that I usually have. There's a lot of complaining going on and things like that. And that's okay. We are never going to, as humans, be in a place where we're just the exact same all the time. We're not robots. We're not, and we're not intended to be. We are not here to learn perfection. We're here to learn love. We are here to learn compassion. And sometimes it's easier for us to feel that love and compassion and forgiveness and grace for other people than it is for ourselves. And some other times it might be easier for us to feel that for ourselves than it is for other people. But I say this to say that, and just to reiterate again, that everything that we think isn't good enough about ourselves, there is a jewel in there. There is something in there that needs to be expressed. There is a higher aspect in there that you are afraid to own, afraid to express, afraid to let manifest. We all have that. We all have that. Another example of this is I have always had a lot of anxiety around being seen, which it may seem hard to believe with me doing things like this. But if you know me more personally, then you know that these kinds of things are very difficult for me. It doesn't come naturally for me. It's not easy for me. This is something, and even my Chiron is in Leo. So everything is pushing me to be seen and put myself out there in that way. But the lower aspect of that is that I spent a lot of my younger years being seen in ways that were just the absolute lowest expression of that. You know, flaunting my body and putting myself out there in ways where I thought I had no problem being seen because I wasn't letting anyone see my soul. It was very superficial, or being promiscuous, or something, sharing my energy in that way instead of in the higher quality, because I there was a part of me that wanted to be seen. There was a part of me that wanted to connect with other people, and there was a part of me that wanted to be appreciated for the things that I brought to the table. We all have that. And it's perfectly normal and healthy to have that, right? Because things exist within us for a reason. God doesn't give us something. It's like that Bible verse. You don't hide your light under a bushel. But the problem is when we don't recognize our own light. And so we express our shadow as if that is our light. And again, that's not something that I shame myself for. It's something that I struggle with sometimes. You know, I definitely have my days where I am just having a hard time and I'm having memories of my past come up, and I feel sad for myself. I feel sad that I thought that's what I needed to do in order to share myself. I feel sad that I didn't recognize certain things within myself sooner, but it's just part of my journey. That just is what it is, and that is when I allow myself to feel that, and then I love that part of myself. And I have to be so intentional about it. I've had times, because I have a really dark past, and what I will say about that is, the darker the shadow, the brighter the light. I don't just say this for myself. I believe this for every single person. And that is why I tend to gravitate towards working with people who have expressed their darkness in ways that they believe they can't come back from, because you can. You 100% can. I feel so much hope and excitement for people who have been to the darkest parts of themselves and who have that desire within them to change. And they have that desire within them to shine their light, and they don't know how, because if you still have that desire, you are not too far gone. You are not too far gone. If you still want to do better, if you want to be a service to humanity, if you want to help other people, it doesn't matter if you've been a drug addict or a prostitute, or if you've murdered someone. I don't care. Go ahead and say in my comments that you think I'm delusional. I've had so many comments like that when I've shared things like that on TikTok. I don't care. I do not care, because I so firmly believe that you are not too far gone. I thought that I was too far gone. And if I had stayed in that place, I wouldn't be here right now. And a lot of you know that if you know my story of drug addiction and how I overdosed and had a near death experience, and that and my near death experience, I've shared this in previous videos, but I will share it again because I think it fits in perfectly with this message. You know, when I hear a lot of people talk about their near death experiences, it's always something like, I saw Jesus and there was gold light all around me and it was the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. Mine was not like that. Um, I saw, I was in this all black room and I was having an out of body experience, and I saw myself naked and covered in these open wounds, basically these gaping holes all over my body. And there were ticks, the insect pouring out. I mean, thousands of ticks pouring out of these wounds. And I was just watching it. And clear as day, I heard a voice say, everything that you have been filling yourself with, everything you've been pouring into yourself has been sucking the life out of you. And I get chills every time I think of it, because I mean, I was really called out, but I didn't feel shamed in that moment. I didn't feel like I was being judged. I didn't feel like, and I was seeing myself as literally the lowest aspect of myself, with these open wounds and ticks just pouring out of me, having had been consumed by by self cannibalism. I mean, that's what it was at that point. I was so far gone. I had just cannibalized myself from the inside out. And I still was not too far gone. Um, it makes me emotional to even talk about it, obviously, but I really believe that everyone can be redeemed, no matter what it is that you've done. If you have something in you, if you have that still small voice that says that you want to change, that says that you have something to share with the world, you have something that will help other people. If you still have that desire to heal, then that desire itself can help heal you. Because I know for me, I got to the point where I didn't feel like I was good enough. I still don't feel like I'm good enough. I don't, I sometimes I think, who am I to be getting on here and sharing my insights about things? But the fact of the matter is, I don't matter. I don't. And I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way. So I want you to follow me here. God matters. And what God has done in my life matters. What I have done in my life through God matters. The things that I have done that have helped heal me are so important. And it's important that I share those with other people. So when I say that I don't matter, I don't mean me as a soul, that I don't have worth, or that I am meaningless or anything like that. What I mean is that it's not about me. It's not about my my lower ego and any ideas that I have about myself. If I made it about myself, I would not be able to do this. Sometimes I do make it about myself, and then I can't post for a few weeks because I have to work through that first. Because I am not, I actually refuse to work from that state, because then I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You know what I mean? I very much feel a conviction to be authentic. I feel a conviction to share things with people that are really real, because life gets dark. Sometimes life gets very, very dark. I've been to those dark places. I've self harmed. I've shoplifted. I've been promiscuous. I've overdosed on drugs. I've been an alcoholic, and it gets dark. You know what I mean? Um, Pretending that it doesn't get dark, pretending that there are not places that can feel like hell for us to experience, that is not going to help anyone. It's not. That does not help anyone. And so, I, if I have to paint myself in a negative light sometimes because I'm sharing these things that I know I'm going to be judged for, if it means that you know that you can heal, then it's okay. If it means that you know, if you're on drugs, if you're an alcoholic, if you are in an abusive relationship, if you're the abuser, and you know, and you hear someone saying to you, that is not who you are. You have the ability and the capacity to change. And I don't mean a surface level change. I mean, you can transform from the inside out. You can really heal. It's possible. You can really heal to the point where the things that you used to do, they don't even interest you anymore. Even if it was right in front of you, you wouldn't even want to do it because you don't recognize that part of yourself anymore, because Christ has come in and made everything alive. And once you experience that life within you, death, consuming death, it's not so tempting anymore. But sometimes we can be in a place where we feel like, I don't know what that life feels like. I don't know if I'll ever know what that life feels like. And I know how that feels because that's exactly how I felt right before I overdosed and had my near death experience. I had spiritual experiences all the time, but they felt lifeless because I was tapping into the eighth sphere. I was tapping into the lower astral, and I was doing so because I was so deeply entrenched in my own pain, in my own trauma, in my own suffering. I was so dysregulated. My body was in survival mode. And when we are in survival mode, we cannot access consistently higher realms on our own. It takes bringing ourselves into a place of balance. Sometimes it takes physical detox. It takes environmental detox. It takes emotional and spiritual detox. It's a lot of work. Okay, I don't want to give the impression that I just had an NDE and all of a sudden, don't have to put the work in and I'm fine. No, it took me a long time, a very long time. And I still have things I'm working through all the time. That's normal. Okay, so don't ever, put me on a pedestal and compare yourself to me and think that that's some destination that you have to reach. Every single person who you see doing this kind of thing and teaching and putting themselves out there, they still have their own stuff to work through too. It's normal. But I will say that you get to a point where the stuff that I'm working through now doesn't look anything like the stuff that I used to have to work through. It's so small in comparison. And that's just what happens. But we have to start with baby steps. As long as we mark ourselves as this is the lower self, this is bad, this is evil, and I want nothing to do with this. So I'm just going to strive and I'm going to strive and I'm going to try to be perfect. And I'm going to pretend this part of me doesn't exist. That's not going to work. We will fail every time. We're setting ourselves up for failure. We have to accept that lower self as if it is an abandoned child. And we have to scoop that child into our arms and love him or love her with everything that we have. And we have to love them into healing. We have to have compassion with ourselves. It's hard. It is so hard, especially if you have done things that feel very unforgivable. I've done a lot of things that I have really struggled to forgive myself for. I have done a lot of things that I know other people that knew me from my past probably still haven't forgiven me for. Just like I've been on the other side of that and had to really work through my issues with forgiving other people. And so we kind of have to just put it in perspective and say it's not about what I've done. It's not about the darkness that I let consume me. It's about who I want to be. It's about what I want to do. And shame is not going to get me there. Love is. So, in order to truly evolve, we have to dedicate ourselves to truth. And shame is not truth. It might have some truth to it, but it's not the whole truth. It's only the whole truth when we can bring love and compassion and grace into the equation. That being said, thank you so much for spending time with me. I love reading your comments and messages and hearing your stories and hearing the things that you've gone through. And if you are struggling to own something about yourself, if you are struggling to forgive yourself for something, if you feel like you've done things that are unforgivable, this is a completely safe space to feel that. Because again, I have done horrible things in the past, and I had to choose to change my life. I had to choose to prioritize healing. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, but it is possible. So no matter what it is that you've done, you are welcome here. And I want you to know that and to feel that. Just to reiterate, the lower self is the forgotten self. Every single aspect of ourselves that we have disowned or that we have forgotten has so much potential. And when we can enter into those wounds and begin to shed light on what exactly that potential is, that is when things will really start to shift and will really start to change for us. So I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And again, thank you so much for being here. I cannot even begin to express how much I appreciate it, because otherwise I couldn't do this. I would just be doing what I used to do, which is talking to myself. So thank you so much.